The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists with a sound that echoed through the quiet suburban street. Officer Derek Mitchell smirked as he shoved the black woman against his patrol car, ignoring her calm insistence that he was making a catastrophic mistake. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that in exactly 48 hours, this woman would be sitting across from him in a federal courtroom, and he would be the one fighting for his freedom. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Riverside Heights, one of those picture-perfect suburban neighborhoods where the houses cost more than most people earned in a decade. The kind of place where the lawns were manicured to perfection, where luxury cars sat in circular driveways, and where a black woman driving a Tesla was apparently suspicious enough to warrant police attention. Attorney Amber Whitfield had been driving home from her office downtown, her mind occupied with the mountain of evidence she'd been compiling for the past 6 months. The Morrison case, a class-action lawsuit against the Riverside Police Department alleging systematic racial profiling and use of excessive force, was the biggest case of her career. In just 2 weeks, she would be standing before a federal judge, representing 47 plaintiffs who had all suffered at the hands of corrupt officers. The irony of what was about to happen to her wasn't lost on the universe. She didn't notice the patrol car following her at first. Why would she? She was going exactly the speed limit, her registration was current, her car was immaculate. There was no reason for concern. But Officer Derek Mitchell didn't need a reason. From his patrol car, Derek watched the Tesla with the kind of predatory focus that had become second nature over his 15 years on the force. His partner, Officer Sarah Chen, sat in the passenger seat, filling out paperwork from their last call. She'd learned over their 3 years together that Derek had what he called instincts about people. Sarah had other words for it, words she kept carefully locked away behind her professional smile. "Doesn't belong here," Derek muttered, accelerating to close the distance between their cruiser and the Tesla. Sarah looked up from her tablet, her dark eyes tracking the car ahead. "What are you talking about? There's nothing." "Didn't use her turn signal back there. That's a violation." Sarah had been watching. There had been no turn, but she'd also learned that questioning Derek's observations in the moment only made things worse. The sick feeling in her stomach was familiar now, a constant companion she'd been trying to ignore for months. Derek hit the lights. Amber saw the flash of red and blue in her rearview mirror and felt her heartbeat quicken, not from guilt, but from a bone-deep weariness that came from being a black woman in America. She knew this routine too well, had represented too many clients who'd been exactly where she was about to be. With practiced precision, she activated her phone's recording app, positioned it on the dashboard, and pulled over to a spot where the dashcam could capture everything. She rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, visible and non-threatening. She'd given this advice to hundreds of clients: stay calm, be polite, comply with lawful orders, document everything, survive. Derek approached with his hand resting casually on his service weapon, his swagger evident in every step. Sarah followed 3 paces behind, her own hand nowhere near her gun, her expression carefully neutral. But her eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in details Derek was too arrogant to notice. "License and registration," Derek demanded, his tone already aggressive, already accusatory. "Of course, officer," Amber replied, her voice steady and professional. "I'm going to reach into my glove compartment for my registration, and then I'll get my license from my purse. I'm telling you this so you know my movements." Derek's jaw tightened at her measured tone. He hated when they were articulate, when they knew their rights, when they refused to be intimidated. Just get them. As Amber retrieved her documents, Sarah positioned herself slightly to Derek's left, where she could see both the driver and her partner. Something was off. The woman's hands weren't shaking. Her voice held no fear, only a kind of resigned professionalism that suggested this wasn't her first encounter with law enforcement. The car was expensive but not flashy, its interior immaculate. On the passenger seat sat a leather briefcase, partially open, revealing thick folders of legal documents. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Derek asked, examining Amber's license with exaggerated scrutiny. No, officer, I don't. I was driving the speed limit, my vehicle is registered and insured, and I committed no traffic violations. The certainty in her voice made Derek's face flush red. You failed to signal when changing lanes 2 blocks back. That's a violation of Section 22,107 of the Vehicle Code. I didn't change lanes, officer. I've been in the right lane since I left downtown. Are you calling me a liar? Sarah's stomach clenched. She'd heard that tone before, had seen where it led. Derek, she said quietly, maybe we should just... Stay in your lane, Chen, he snapped without looking at her. To Amber, step out of the vehicle. Amber's hands remained on the wheel. Officer, am I being detained? Under what probable cause? You're being detained for a traffic violation and failure to comply with a lawful order. Step out of the vehicle. Every instinct Amber had developed over her 20-year legal career was screaming at her that this was about to escalate, that this officer was looking for a confrontation, that her professional knowledge of the law made her a threat to his authority. She could fight this later in court, but she had to survive the next few minutes first. I am complying, officer, she said, her voice measured and clear. I'm unbuckling my seatbelt now. I'm opening my door now. I'm stepping out now. She emerged from the Tesla with fluid grace, her designer suit impeccable, her natural hair styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders. At 5'9", she stood nearly eye to eye with Derek, and her presence, the kind of quiet authority that came from years in courtrooms facing down hostile judges and aggressive prosecutors, clearly unsettled him. Turn around, hands behind your back. Sarah stepped forward instinctively. Derek, what are you doing? This is just a traffic stop. I said stay back. Derek's hand moved to his cuffs. This woman is being combative and suspicious. I have been nothing but cooperative, Amber stated, her tone still controlled but with steel underneath. Officer, I'm an attorney. I know my rights. You have no probable cause to arrest me. The word attorney hit Derek like a match to gasoline. He grabbed Amber's arm and spun her around with unnecessary force, slamming her against the side of the Tesla. The impact rattled through her shoulder, and Sarah saw Amber's briefcase tumble from the car's passenger seat, spilling documents across the pavement. Derek, stop. Sarah moved closer, her voice urgent now. This isn't resisting arrest, Derek shouted, loud enough for the dash cam to catch, even though Amber hadn't moved except to brace herself against his assault. He wrenched her arms behind her back, the cuffs clicking into place so tight that Sarah could see them biting into Amber's wrists. I am not resisting, Amber said, her voice projecting with courtroom clarity toward where she knew the dash cam would be recording. I am a civil rights attorney. My name is Amber Whitfield. I am being illegally detained and assaulted by Officer Derek Mitchell, badge number 2847 at approximately 4:47 p.m. on Residential Street in Riverside Heights. I have committed no crime. I am not resisting. This arrest is unlawful. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she finally really looked at the documents scattered on the pavement. Legal briefs, federal court filings, and there on the top page of a thick folder, Morrison v. Riverside Police Department. Lead counsel, Amber J. Whitfield-esque. Derek, Sarah breathed, reaching for his arm. Derek, stop. You need to stop right now. But Derek was too far gone, too committed to his narrative, too threatened by this woman who refused to show fear. He shoved Amber toward the patrol car, reading her rights in a voice dripping with contempt, while Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing through the catastrophic implications of what she was witnessing. Amber didn't struggle, didn't shout, didn't give Derek any excuse to escalate further. She simply turned her head enough to look Sarah dead in the eye, and in that moment, Sarah saw something that would haunt her. Not fear, not anger, but a profound disappointment that said I expected better, and a knowing that said I've seen this before, and you have a choice to make. As Derek shoved Amber into the back of the patrol car, Sarah knelt to gather the scattered documents, her hands shaking as she read the case summaries, the plaintiff testimonies, the evidence of systemic abuse. And there, in the middle of the pile, was a folder labeled Officer D. Mitchell Pattern of Misconduct. Sarah looked up at Derek, who was strutting back to the driver's seat with the satisfied air of someone who thought he'd just won. She looked at Amber, sitting calmly in the back seat, her eyes closed, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been a mental recording of every detail for the lawsuit she was absolutely going to file. And Sarah Chen, who had joined the force to serve and protect, who had compromised and looked away and told herself she was being a good partner, finally understood that some choices you couldn't come back from. She carefully gathered every single document, placed them back in the briefcase, and carried it to the trunk. Her body camera was recording. The dash cam was recording. Amber's phone, still on the Tesla's dashboard, was recording. Everything that happened next would be evidence. The Riverside Police Department's main precinct had the sterile, fluorescent-lit atmosphere of institutional authority, all gray walls, scuffed linoleum, and the constant background noise of ringing phones and barked orders. It was 5:23 p.m. when Derek marched Amber through the back entrance, still cuffed, moving her through processing with the kind of theatrical roughness that suggested he was performing for an audience. Sarah followed 3 steps behind, Amber's briefcase clutched in both hands like it was radioactive. Because it was. Every page inside that case was radioactive to Derek's career, to the department, possibly to her own future. Book her for resisting arrest, obstruction, and assault on an officer, Derek announced to Sergeant Rodriguez at the processing desk. Rodriguez, a 23-year veteran with sharp eyes that missed nothing, looked up from his computer screen. Assault on an officer. I don't see any injuries, Mitchell. She tried to grab my weapon during the stop. The lie was so blatant, so easily disproven, that Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The processing area had gone quiet. 3 other officers had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. Amber spoke for the first time since arriving, her voice calm and clear. "That's a false accusation, Sergeant. I'm happy to wait while you review the dash cam and body cam footage, which will show I never moved toward Officer Mitchell's weapon or any part of his person, except when he physically assaulted me." Rodriguez's eyebrows rose. The woman spoke like a lawyer because she was one. He'd seen enough arrests to know when something smelled wrong. "Mitchell, step into my office. Chen, get her processed." "She's dangerous," Derek protested. "I should." "Office now." As Derek reluctantly followed Rodriguez, Sarah was left alone with Amber in the processing area. She moved mechanically through the procedures: fingerprints, photograph, property inventory, her hands shaking so badly that she had to redo Amber's fingerprints twice. "Officer Chen," Amber said quietly, during a moment when no one else was in earshot, "you seem like a decent person caught in an indecent situation." Sarah's eyes snapped up to meet Amber's. The attorney's gaze was knowing, almost gentle. "I saw you trying to stop him," Amber continued. "I saw you gather my documents. You know this is wrong." I can't," Sarah's voice cracked. "I'm his partner." "You're a police officer. Your oath is to the law, not to him." Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to explain, to justify, to make this woman understand the impossible position she was in. The blue wall of silence wasn't just a code, it was survival. Officers who broke ranks found themselves without backup, ostracized, forced out. She had student loans, a mortgage, a mother in assisted living who depended on her. But as she looked into Amber's eyes, eyes that held no hatred despite everything Derek had done, only a weary determination, Sarah understood that all her justifications were just elaborate excuses for cowardice. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered. "Open my briefcase." Sarah hesitated, then walked to where she'd set the leather case on a nearby desk. Her hands trembled as she unfastened the clasp. Inside, organized with meticulous precision, was a catalog of institutional failure, 47 sworn statements from citizens who'd been stopped, harassed, beaten, and falsely arrested by Riverside police officers. Photographs of bruises, broken bones, and worse. Medical records. Internal affairs complaints that had been dismissed or buried. Financial records showing a pattern of settled civil suits. And there, in its own section, was Derek Mitchell's file. Sarah pulled it out with nerveless fingers. 18 excessive force complaints over 15 years. 12 dismissed by internal affairs. 6 settled quietly by the city for a total of $340,000. Accusations of racial profiling, illegal searches, falsified reports, perjury on the witness stand. And woven through it all, a pattern so clear that Sarah felt sick she'd never seen it before. Derek targeted Black and Latino drivers in affluent neighborhoods, manufacturing violations, escalating encounters, and then documenting his victims as aggressive or non-compliant. "Oh God," Sarah breathed. "Oh God, I've been partnered with him for 3 years. How did I not?" "Because the system is designed to protect officers like him," Amber said, her voice still gentle but firm. "Because good people convince themselves that looking away is different from participating. Because by the time you realized who he really was, you were already complicit." The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Complicit. How many traffic stops had she stood by and watched? How many times had Derek's instincts led them to pull over Black drivers for phantom violations? How many times had she told herself that questioning him would only make things worse, that she was being a good partner by backing his play? "The Morrison case," Sarah said, looking up from the file. "You're the lead attorney." "I am. We file in federal court in 12 days. 47 plaintiffs, all of whom were illegally detained, searched, or arrested by Riverside PD officers. We're seeking systemic reform, financial damages, and criminal prosecution where applicable." Sarah's mind raced. "And now Derek has given you plaintiff number 48. "Actually," Amber corrected with the ghost of a smile, "I'm going to be the attorney who prosecutes the case. What happened to me today will be Exhibit A in demonstrating that this department's problems go all the way to the top. Because here's what's about to happen, Officer Chen. Sergeant Rodriguez is reviewing the footage right now. He's going to see that Derek lied about every aspect of this stop. And then he's going to have a choice. Admit that one of his officers committed a crime, or help Derek cover it up." "They'll cover it up," Sarah said dully. "They always do." "Usually, but not this time." Amber's voice hardened with certainty. "Because this time I have resources, I have media contacts, I have federal judges who already have pending cases about this department, and I have something they don't know about yet." "What?" Amber looked pointedly at Sarah's uniform, at the body camera mounted on her chest. "I have an honest cop who recorded everything." Sarah's hand flew to her camera. In the chaos of the arrest, she'd forgotten it was running. Every word Derek had said, every moment of the escalation, the documents scattering, the illegal arrest, all of it captured from her vantage point, her angle showing details the dash cam might have missed. "They'll confiscate the footage," Sarah said. "They'll delete it or claim it malfunctioned. They'll try, but those cameras auto-upload to a cloud server every 30 minutes. The footage from your camera and the dash cam is already backed up in multiple secure locations. It's time-stamped and encrypted. Even if they delete it from the local servers, it exists." Sarah sank into a nearby chair, her career flashing before her eyes. "If I testify to what happened, they'll destroy me. I'll never work in law enforcement again." "Probably not in Riverside," Amber agreed. "But Officer Chen, Sarah, can I call you Sarah?" Sarah nodded numbly. "Sarah, you seem like someone who became a cop for the right reasons. Someone who wanted to help people, protect communities, make a difference. Am I right?" "I thought so, before." Sarah gestured helplessly around the station. "Before you realized the system was broken. Before you understood that good cops who stay silent become part of the problem. Before you had to choose between your career and your conscience." Amber leaned forward as much as the cuffs would allow. "Here's what I can tell you. Testifying against Derek won't end your law enforcement career. It will end this version of it. But there are departments that desperately need officers with integrity. Agencies that value truth over loyalty. And there are other ways to serve justice that don't involve wearing a badge." "Like what?" "Like working for organizations that hold bad cops accountable. Like becoming an investigator for civil rights firms. Like using your inside knowledge of how the system works to help reform it from the outside." Amber's eyes bored into Sarah's. "But first, you have to decide who you are. Are you Derek Mitchell's partner, or are you a police officer who believes in actual justice?" Before Sarah could answer, Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from his office, his face carved from stone. Derek followed, looking smug and confident. That confidence evaporated when Rodriguez turned to face him. "Officer Mitchell, you're suspended pending investigation. Gun and badge, now." Derek's face went purple. What? You looked at the footage, you saw how aggressive she was. I saw you manufacture a traffic stop, escalate a routine interaction into an arrest, use excessive force, and then lie about assault on an officer. Rodriguez's voice could have cut glass. I also saw Officer Chen trying to stop you, and I saw you ignore her. Give me your gun and badge right now, or I'll have you escorted out in cuffs. The processing area had gone completely silent. Every officer within earshot had frozen, watching the scene with shocked faces. This didn't happen. Cops didn't turn on each other like this, not publicly, not immediately. But then Rodriguez did something even more shocking. He turned to Amber, pulled out his keys, and personally unlocked her handcuffs. Ms. Whitfield, and yes, I know exactly who you are. I apologize on behalf of this department. You're free to go. Your vehicle is in the station lot. We'll need your statement, but you can provide that through your attorney. He paused, then added quietly, or you can provide it yourself since you are an attorney. Amber rubbed her wrists, the red marks from the too tight cuffs clearly visible. Sergeant Rodriguez, I appreciate the apology, but we both know this isn't over. I'll be filing federal charges against Officer Mitchell personally, and adding today's incident to the Morrison case as evidence of ongoing departmental failure. I understand. For what it's worth, there are those of us who have been trying to clean house for years. Maybe your lawsuit will finally force the changes we couldn't make from inside. Derek exploded. Are you kidding me? You're taking her side. She's the one suing us. She's the enemy. Rodriguez turned on him with barely contained fury. No, Mitchell, you're the enemy. You're the reason we're getting sued. You're the reason good officers have to defend the badge from people who think we're all like you. And you're done. Get out of my station. As Derek was escorted away, still shouting about betrayal and conspiracy, Amber gathered her briefcase. She started toward the exit, then paused next to where Sarah still sat, frozen in her chair. Officer Chen, Amber said quietly, reaching into her jacket pocket and pulling out a business card. When you're ready to tell the truth about what happened today, call me. And when you're ready to talk about what else you've seen during your time as Mitchell's partner, call me. The choice is yours, but choose soon because this is about to become very public, very fast. Sarah took the card with shaking hands. Embossed on heavy cream cardstock, Amber J. Whitfield, Esquire, Partner, Civil Rights Division, Hamilton and Associates. Below that, a personal cell number written in elegant script. I'm not brave like you, Sarah whispered. Amber's smile was sad and knowing. Neither was I until the moment I had to be. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Officer Chen. It's doing the right thing despite the fear. Think about it. And then she was gone, walking out of the precinct with her head high and her briefcase full of evidence that would bring the entire corrupt system crashing down. Sarah sat in the processing area for another 20 minutes, turning the business card over and over in her hands while the station erupted into chaos around her. Officers clustered in worried groups, discussing the implications. Phones rang off the hook. The chief was called in from dinner. And Sarah Chen, who had spent 3 years being a good partner instead of a good cop, finally understood what she had to do. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the card. Amber answered on the first ring. I'll testify, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she expected. I'll tell you everything I know about Derek, everything I've seen, everything I should have reported but didn't. I'll testify. There was a long pause. Then Amber's voice, warm with approval, come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Bring every report, every incident, every memory. We're going to make sure Derek Mitchell never wears a badge again. As Sarah ended the call, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The weight of compromise lifting from her shoulders, replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of choosing integrity over comfort. She didn't know it yet, but that phone call had just changed the course of her life, Derek's life, and the future of the entire Riverside Police Department. The reckoning was coming. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Hamilton and Associates at 8:45 a.m., carrying a box that contained 3 years of carefully filed incident reports, patrol logs, and her personal journal, a detailed record she'd kept because some part of her had always known this day might come. The law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise, all glass walls and polished marble, the kind of space that radiated power and success. Sarah felt like an imposter in her civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, trying to look like anything other than a cop entering enemy territory. Except this wasn't enemy territory, not anymore. Amber met her personally in the lobby, extending a hand that Sarah shook with clammy fingers. In the harsh light of day, without handcuffs and with her authority restored, Amber was even more formidable. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary, her locks swept up in an elegant twist, diamond studs catching the light. But her smile was genuine, and her eyes held understanding rather than judgment. "You came," Amber said simply. "I almost didn't. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to convince myself to drive away." "But you didn't. That takes courage, Sarah, real courage." Amber led her to a conference room where two other attorneys waited. Marcus Thompson, a black man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms, and Jennifer Park, a sharp-eyed Korean-American woman who Sarah later learned had been a public defender before joining the firm's civil rights division. For the next 4 hours, Sarah talked. She started with yesterday's arrest, walking through every detail while the attorneys took notes and a court reporter transcribed everything. Then she went back further, recounting incident after incident where Derek had manufactured probable cause, escalated situations needlessly, used excessive force, filed false reports. "March 15th, 2 years ago," Sarah said, her voice hoarse from talking. "Derek pulled over a Latino man in his 20s for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. When the driver questioned it, Derek yanked him out of the car and slammed him against the hood hard enough that the man had a concussion. I didn't report it. I told myself the guy should have just complied, that Derek was having a bad day." "Do you remember the man's name?" Marcus asked gently. Sarah pulled out her journal and flipped to the right page. "Carlos Mendoza. I wrote down all their names. I told myself I was keeping records in case something happened, but really, I think I was keeping evidence against myself, proof of all the times I stayed silent." Jennifer looked up from her laptop. "Carlos Mendoza is plaintiff number 17 in the Morrison case. His testimony about that incident is part of our evidence." The room fell silent. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. 17 people she could have helped if she just found her courage sooner. 17 people who'd suffered while she chose loyalty over justice. "How many more?" she whispered. "How many more names in my journal are in your case files?" Amber's voice was gentle but firm. "A lot, but Sarah, you're here now. You're doing the right thing now. That matters." Does it matter that I'm only brave now that it's my ass on the line? Now that staying silent would destroy my own career?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes kind. "Officer Chen, I've been doing civil rights law for 30 years. You know what the hardest witnesses to get are? Cops. Good cops who saw bad things but were too afraid to speak up. The system beats it out of them. Loyalty over truth, the blue wall, all of it. Most officers go their whole careers never finding the strength to break that wall. You found it. That's not nothing." By noon, they had enough testimony from Sarah to corroborate and expand 17 of the Morrison plaintiffs' cases. But it was what came next that transformed the case from significant to explosive. "There's something else," Sarah said, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. 2 months ago, I started noticing discrepancies in Derek's reports, times that didn't match video footage, descriptions of suspects that didn't match actual people. So I started keeping copies. Every report he filed, I kept a backup, and I started comparing them to the actual body cam and dash cam footage." She plugged the drive into Jennifer's laptop. The screen filled with folders labeled by date, each containing multiple files. Derek's official reports, unedited video footage, Sarah's notes documenting the differences. Jennifer opened the first folder at random. It was from 6 weeks ago, a stop in the same affluent neighborhood where Derek had arrested Amber. The official report described the driver as aggressive and non-compliant, reaching toward waistband in threatening manner. The video showed a terrified teenager, hands visible on the wheel the entire time, stammering "yes sir" to every question while Derek screamed inches from his face. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. "This is systematic perjury. How many files are on here?" 43 incidents over 8 weeks, Sarah said. Every single one shows Derek lying in his reports, fabricating threats, exaggerating resistance, and I helped him. I signed off on these reports as the witnessing officer. I'm as guilty as he is." "No," Amber said firmly. "You witnessed and documented. You didn't perjure yourself in court. You didn't testify to false facts. And now you're providing evidence that will help dozens of people who Derek victimized. There's a difference between complicity and participation." "Is there? Because it doesn't feel that different." The attorneys exchanged looks. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Officer Chen, we need to be straight with you about what happens next. With this evidence and your testimony, we're going to amend the Morrison case to include criminal referrals. Derek Mitchell will likely face charges for perjury, civil rights violations, assault, false imprisonment, and possibly federal charges. The case will expand to examine why the department failed to catch these discrepancies, which means internal affairs, supervising officers, and potentially the chief will all be under scrutiny." "I understand. But here's what you need to understand about your position," Jennifer added. "You documented crimes and stayed silent for months. Technically, you could face charges for misprision of felony, failing to report a crime. The DA will have discretion about whether to charge you, and a lot of that will depend on your cooperation level and the publicity around the case." Sarah had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so bluntly still hit like a gut punch. "So I might end up charged alongside Derek." "Unlikely," Amber said. "You're providing voluntary testimony and evidence. You're the key witness. Most prosecutors won't bite the hand that's feeding them this kind of case. But Jennifer's right, you need to understand the risk. This could still blow up your life." "My life is already blown up," Sarah said flatly. "I can't go back to being Derek's partner. I can't go back to pretending. So what happens now?" What happened now was a carefully orchestrated legal avalanche. That afternoon, Amber's firm filed an emergency motion with the federal judge overseeing the Morrison case, submitting Sarah's testimony and the flash drive contents under seal. The motion requested an expedited hearing and added Amber's own arrest as a new claim, demonstrating ongoing civil rights violations. By 5 p.m., the motion had leaked to the press. By 6 p.m., every local news station was running the story. Prominent civil rights attorney arrested by officer she was actively suing. By 7 p.m., the footage from Sarah's body cam, released by the court as part of the public record, had gone viral on social media. By 8 p.m., Derek Mitchell had hired a lawyer and issued a statement calling Amber's arrest justified and appropriate, while blaming anti-police bias for the controversy. By 9 p.m., 3 more officers from Riverside PD had retained attorneys. By 10 p.m., the mayor had called for an independent investigation. And by 11 p.m., Sarah Chen was trending on Twitter as both a hero and a traitor, depending on who was doing the talking. She watched it all unfold from her apartment, her phone blowing up with calls and texts she didn't answer. Messages from fellow officers ranged from supportive, "You did the right thing," to vicious, "You're a rat and a disgrace to the badge." Her sergeant called 4 times. The police union's attorney called twice. Her mother called once, having seen the news, her voice worried but proud. Sarah ignored them all except the last one. She spent 20 minutes assuring her mother that she was safe, that she'd done the right thing, that everything would be okay. Lies mostly, but comforting ones. Around midnight, Amber called. "How are you holding up?" Sarah laughed, a sound without humor. "I've been better. My career is over, half my former colleagues want me dead, and I might still face charges. Living the dream. I know this is hard. I know it feels like your world is ending. But Sarah, what you did today is going to change lives. Real people who Derek hurt will get justice because of you." "Tell me something," Sarah said. "When you were cuffed in that patrol car, did you know I was going to break? Did you plan this?" There was a long pause. "Honestly, I hoped. I saw something in your eyes, conflict, conscience, maybe just exhaustion with the compromise. I've learned to recognize that look. It's the look of good people who have stayed silent too long and are finally ready to stop. I gambled that you were one of them. And if you'd been wrong, then I would have filed the case with the evidence I had, and one more officer would have kept hiding behind the blue wall. But I wasn't wrong about you, Sarah. You're proving that right now." After they hung up, Sarah tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind kept replaying the past 3 years, all the moments she could have spoken up but didn't, all the people who'd suffered because of her silence. Carlos Mendoza with his concussion, a grandmother arrested for matching a description that described half the black women in the city, a college kid roughed up during a traffic stop for a parking violation. 17 names in her journal that matched 17 plaintiffs in the Morrison case. How many more that didn't? How many people had Derek hurt that never reported it, never sought justice, never got their day in court? Around 3 a.m., Sarah finally fell into fitful sleep, her dreams haunted by handcuffs and Amber Whitfield's knowing eyes. She didn't know it yet, but while she slept, the federal prosecutor's office was preparing criminal charges. In the morning, Derek Mitchell would be arrested in his home, led out in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment. The image of a cop being perp-walked would dominate the news cycle for days. The reckoning had truly begun. The federal courthouse was packed on the morning Derek Mitchell's trial began, 11 months after his arrest of Amber Whitfield. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of grand jury testimony, plea negotiations that Derek had arrogantly refused, and a media circus that had turned a local police corruption case into a national conversation about systemic racism in law enforcement. Sarah sat in the witness waiting room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd already given 4 depositions and testified before the grand jury, but this was different. This was Derek's actual criminal trial. 3 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, 2 counts of perjury, 1 count of assault, and 1 count of falsifying records. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 15 years in federal prison. The civil case, the Morrison lawsuit, had already settled 3 months ago. The city had agreed to a $4.2 million payout to the 47 original plaintiffs plus Amber, along with a consent decree requiring sweeping reforms. Mandatory body cameras that couldn't be disabled, independent oversight of internal affairs investigations, bias training, early warning systems for officers with patterns of complaints, and the firing of 12 officers including 3 supervisors who had systematically ignored or buried complaints against Derek and others. The police chief had resigned, the head of internal affairs had been demoted, and Sarah Chen had been quietly transferred to a different department, not Riverside PD, but a neighboring county's sheriff's office whose progressive sheriff had specifically recruited her after reading about her testimony. Officer Chen, a victim advocate, poked her head into the waiting room. "They're ready for you." Sarah stood on shaking legs and walked into the courtroom. It was everything she'd expected and worse. A packed gallery, news cameras, allowed because this was federal court and a matter of public interest. And in the defendant's seat, Derek Mitchell looking older and harder than she remembered. His eyes found hers as she walked to the witness stand, and the hatred in them was almost physical. But Sarah didn't look away. She'd spent 11 months in therapy learning not to look away anymore. The prosecution attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Williams, approached with a kind smile. "Officer Chen, can you please state your name and former position for the record?" "Sarah Chen. I was a patrol officer with the Riverside Police Department for 5 years, partnered with the defendant, Derek Mitchell, for the last 3 of those years." "And why do you say was?" "I resigned from Riverside PD 7 months ago, after providing testimony in this case, and in the civil rights lawsuit filed by Amber Whitfield." For the next 3 hours, Sarah walked the jury through everything. The pattern of illegal stops, the escalations, the falsified reports, the culture of silence that protected officers like Derek while punishing those who questioned them. She described specific incidents from her flash drive, with video evidence played on screens throughout the courtroom showing the stark contrast between Derek's reports and reality. She testified about the day Derek arrested Amber, describing in painstaking detail how he'd manufactured probable cause, ignored Amber's clear statements of her rights, and then lied about her being aggressive or threatening. "And Officer Chen," Catherine Williams asked, "why didn't you stop your partner that day?" Sarah felt her throat tighten. This was the question she'd been dreading and rehearsing. "Because I was afraid of being labeled a traitor, afraid of losing my job, afraid of what would happen if I chose integrity over loyalty. I convinced myself that going along with Derek's version of events was somehow different from participating in his crimes. I was wrong. And that day, watching him brutalize a woman who had done nothing wrong, a woman who turned out to be one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. I finally understood that my silence made me complicit in every abuse he'd committed. Do you regret staying silent for so long? Every single day. I can't change what I didn't do, but I can make sure Derek Mitchell never wears a badge again, and I can help make sure the system that protected him for 15 years gets reformed so fewer officers like him slip through. Derek's attorney, a bombastic defender named Richard Cross, tried to tear Sarah apart on cross-examination. He painted her as a disgruntled officer, a traitor seeking revenge, a woman with a grudge who'd fabricated evidence and testimony. But every attack fell flat against the video evidence, against the pattern documented across dozens of incidents, against the testimony of 17 other victims who all described the same MO. When Sarah finally stepped down, exhausted and wrung out, she made eye contact with Amber, who sat in the front row of the gallery. Amber nodded once, a gesture of respect and gratitude that meant more to Sarah than any words could have. The trial lasted 2 weeks. 17 victims testified, each one describing their encounter with Derek in heartbreaking detail. Carlos Mendoza, the young man with the concussion, broke down on the stand describing how Derek's violence had given him PTSD that made him terrified of police officers. An elderly black woman described being thrown to the ground during a traffic stop and suffering a broken hip. A teenager talked about being handcuffed and searched without cause, while Derek hurled racial slurs. And finally, Amber herself testified. She was the prosecution's closing witness, and she was magnificent, calm, articulate, devastating. She walked the jury through her arrest, explaining each point where Derek had violated her constitutional rights, each moment where he'd had the opportunity to de-escalate but chose violence instead. This wasn't about a traffic stop, Amber told the jury. This was about power. Officer Mitchell saw a black woman in an expensive car in a wealthy neighborhood, and he couldn't tolerate that. He couldn't accept that I belonged there, that I had every right to be there. So he manufactured a reason to stop me, escalated a non-threatening situation into a violent arrest, and then lied about my behavior to justify his actions. This is the pattern of behavior he's exhibited for 15 years. And the only reason he's finally facing consequences is because he made the mistake of targeting someone with the resources and knowledge to fight back. She paused, looking directly at Derek. But what about all the people who didn't have those resources? What about the victims who didn't know their rights, couldn't afford attorneys, were too afraid or too traumatized to come forward? Officer Mitchell hurt them too, and they deserve justice just as much as I do. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sarah wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She'd been released from her witness duties days earlier, but Amber called her immediately afterward. "It's done," Amber said, her voice thick with emotion. "Guilty on everything. Derek's looking at 12 to 15 years. Sarah felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. 12 to 15 years, that's real justice. It is. And Sarah, none of this would have been possible without you. Your testimony, your evidence, that's what made the difference between Derek walking free and Derek going to prison. I should have come forward sooner, I should have." "Stop," Amber interrupted gently. "You came forward when you did, and that's what matters. You can spend the rest of your life beating yourself up for the past, or you can focus on making sure the future is better. I know which one I'd choose." 6 months later, Sarah stood in a different courtroom, not as a witness this time, but as a graduate. She'd completed an intensive 12-week training program to become a licensed investigator specializing in police misconduct cases. Amber's firm had sponsored her training and offered her a position in their civil rights division. "Congratulations, Investigator Chen," Amber said, shaking her hand as Sarah received her certificate. "Ready to help us hold more bad cops accountable?" Sarah looked at the certificate in her hands, at Amber's proud smile, at the other investigators and attorneys who'd welcomed her into this new career fighting on the right side of justice. More than ready. Her first case was investigating a complaint against officers in a neighboring county, officers who, like Derek, had a pattern of targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods. But this time, Sarah knew what to look for. She knew how officers covered their tracks, how they fabricated reports, how they relied on the code of silence. And this time she wasn't staying silent. The work was hard and often heartbreaking. Each case she investigated revealed victims, people who'd been profiled, harassed, assaulted, and robbed of their dignity and rights. But with each successful prosecution, with each officer held accountable, and each victim's voice finally heard, Sarah felt like she was rebuilding something she'd lost during her years with Derek. She was rebuilding her integrity. 18 months after Derek's conviction, Sarah and Amber attended the dedication of the Marcus Thompson Civil Rights Training Center, named for Amber's colleague who'd helped prosecute Derek and who'd recently been appointed to the federal bench. The center would train police officers throughout the state in constitutional policing, de-escalation, and bias recognition. "You know what the beautiful irony is?" Amber said as they watched officers file into the center for the inaugural training session. "Derek thought he was untouchable. He thought his badge gave him the right to terrorize people. But his arrest became the catalyst for reforms that will prevent thousands of future Derek Mitchells from abusing their power." Sarah nodded, watching young officers, some barely older than she'd been when she first partnered with Derek, listening intently to instructors talk about constitutional rights and accountability. "Do you think it's enough? All these reforms, all these trainings? Enough to fix everything?" "No. Systemic change takes generations, but enough to make things better. Absolutely. Every officer who learns that power comes with responsibility, every department that implements real accountability measures, every victim who gets justice, that's progress. That's how you change systems. One case, one training, one reform department at a time." That evening, Sarah visited her mother, who'd hung the framed news article about Derek's conviction in her living room like a trophy. "My daughter, the hero," her mother said for the 100th time. "I'm not a hero, Mom. I'm just someone who eventually did the right thing." Eventually is better than never. And now look at you, helping other people do the right thing too, making sure fewer people suffer like those poor families who Derek hurt. Sarah thought about that as she drove home. She'd never be able to erase the 3 years she'd spent as Derek's silent partner. Those mistakes would always be part of her story, but they didn't have to be the end of her story. She pulled into her parking space and checked her phone. An email from Amber, a new case, allegations of excessive force against 3 officers in a nearby city, witnesses too scared to come forward, a pattern of complaints buried by internal affairs, all the hallmarks of another Derek Mitchell situation. Sarah opened her laptop and began drafting her investigation plan. She knew how this worked now. She knew where to look, who to talk to, how to find the truth that departments tried to hide. And she knew that somewhere out there, a victim who'd been silenced was about to find their voice. Because Sarah Chen had found hers. Epilogue 2 years later. The conference hall was packed with nearly 300 attendees, police officers, civil rights attorneys, community activists, journalists, all gathered for the National Symposium on Police Accountability and Reform. On the stage, sharing a panel titled "From Complicity to Courage, Reforming Policing from Within and Without," sat Amber Whitfield and Sarah Chen. "The question we get asked most," Amber told the audience, "is whether real change is possible, whether all these reforms, all these lawsuits, all this training actually makes a difference. And I think Sarah's story, our story, shows that it does." Sarah nodded, though public speaking still made her nervous. 2 years ago, I was a cop who stayed silent about abuses I witnessed daily. I told myself I was being a good partner, that loyalty mattered more than truth. Today, I'm an investigator who's helped hold 12 officers accountable for civil rights violations. The difference isn't that I became a different person. It's that I finally found the courage to be the person I always should have been. An audience member raised her hand. "But what about the cost? Officer Chen, you lost your career, your colleagues, everything. Was it worth it?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I didn't lose everything. I lost a job at a department that valued loyalty over justice. I lost colleagues who prioritized the blue wall over constitutional rights. What I gained was self-respect, meaningful work, and the knowledge that I'm helping prevent other people from suffering the way Derek Mitchell's victims did. So yes, it was worth it." After the panel, as attendees crowded around to ask questions and share their own stories, a young black woman approached Sarah and Amber. She was maybe 25, wearing a police academy uniform. "Ms. Whitfield, Officer Chen, thank you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm 2 months from graduation. The Marcus Thompson Center training was part of our curriculum, and listening to your stories, I want you to know that there are those of us coming up who are going to do better, who are going to be the change." Amber smiled warmly. "What's your name?" Keisha Morrison." Both Amber and Sarah went still. Morrison, the family whose lawsuit had started everything. Keisha saw their recognition and nodded. "My uncle was Carlos Mendoza, plaintiff 17. What Derek Mitchell did to my uncle, the way the system protected him for years, that's why I joined the academy. To be the kind of cop who protects people instead of hurting them. To be like Officer Chen, who found the courage to stand up even when it cost her everything." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. "Your uncle, how is he?" "Better. It took a long time, a lot of therapy. But he actually testified at a city council hearing last month, supporting funding for the Civilian Oversight Board. He says that getting justice, finally being believed and seeing Derek convicted, that helped him heal. So thank you, both of you." As Keisha walked away, Sarah turned to Amber. "She's going to be a good cop. Because of what we did. Because Derek's conviction showed her that accountability is possible, that good cops who speak up can make a difference." Amber squeezed Sarah's shoulder. "That's the legacy of choosing courage over complicity. That's how you change the system." That night, Sarah returned to her apartment and added a new photo to the collection on her desk. It sat next to her investigator's license, next to the framed thank you letter from Carlos Mendoza, next to the newspaper clipping about Derek's sentencing. The new photo showed her and Amber at the symposium, standing on either side of Keisha Morrison. 3 generations of the fight for justice, connected by one illegal arrest that had catalyzed transformation. Sarah looked at the photo and thought about Derek, who was currently serving his sentence at a federal prison 200 miles away. She wondered if he understood yet, if he grasped that his arrogance and abuse had ultimately created the very accountability he'd always managed to escape. Probably not. Men like Derek rarely achieved that kind of self-awareness. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that he couldn't hurt anyone else. What mattered was that the system that had protected him for 15 years had been forced to change. What mattered was that victims had found justice and future victims had stronger protections. And what mattered most was that somewhere out there, a young officer like Keisha Morrison was preparing to wear the badge with honor, integrity, and courage. The kind of courage that Sarah had taken too long to find, but had finally claimed as her own. The work continued. There would always be more Derek Mitchells, more departments that protected the wrong officers, more victims who needed advocates. But there would also be more Keishas, more reformers, more people willing to stand up and say, "Not on my watch." And that, Sarah thought as she prepared for bed, was how you changed the world. Not in one dramatic moment, but in thousands of small acts of courage that accumulated into systemic transformation. She'd found her courage 2 years ago in a police station processing area, holding Amber Whitfield's business card and making the hardest phone call of her life. And every single day since, she'd chosen to be brave again. Call to action. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? When you saw your partner crossing the line, brutalizing an innocent woman, would you have found the courage to speak up? Or would you have stayed silent, telling yourself it wasn't your fight? This story is more than just entertainment. It's a mirror held up to every situation where we have to choose between what's easy and what's right, between loyalty and justice, between silence and courage. Sarah Chen spent 3 years making the wrong choice. She told herself she was being a good partner, that loyalty mattered, that speaking up would only make things worse. But eventually, she couldn't ignore her conscience anymore. And when she finally found her voice, she didn't just save herself. She helped deliver justice to 47 victims, prevented future abuses, and inspired reforms that protected thousands of people. If this story made your blood boil, if Derek Mitchell's arrogance and abuse ignited something in you, if Amber's strength and Sarah's redemption gave you hope, then I need you to take action right now. Drop a like if you believe accountability matters, if you think corrupt cops should face real consequences. If you're sick of seeing power abused and victims ignored, That like tells YouTube to share this story with more people, to spread this message of justice and courage to viewers who need to hear it. Comment Justice SCRVAD if you're glad Derek Mitchell is behind bars where he belongs. Tell me in the comments, would you have had Sarah's courage? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and doing the right thing? What would you have done differently? Your comments create a community of people who refuse to accept injustice, who believe that speaking up matters, and I read every single one. Subscribe and hit that bell because this channel is dedicated to stories that matter. Stories about people who fight for what's right even when it costs them everything. Stories about justice prevailing over corruption. Stories that remind us we're not powerless against broken systems. I have dozens more stories like this waiting. Whistleblowers who exposed billion-dollar fraud, victims who became advocates, everyday people who changed laws and saved lives. You're not just watching entertainment, you're joining a movement. A community of people who believe that courage matters, that truth matters, that standing up for what's right is always worth the cost. Here's the truth that people like Derek Mitchell don't want you to know. Systems only stay corrupt when good people stay silent. Change happens when individuals find their courage, when witnesses become whistleblowers, when victims become advocates, when you decide that you won't look away anymore. Sarah Chen's story proves that it's never too late to do the right thing. That one person speaking up can catalyze massive change. That choosing integrity over comfort might cost you in the short term, but it's the only choice that lets you sleep at night. So if you're tired of watching injustice go unpunished, if you want more stories about people who fight back and win, if you believe that courage and accountability should be celebrated and shared, hit that like button. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story about justice prevailing over corruption. Because these stories, they're not just inspiration, they're blueprints. They're proof that standing up works, that speaking out matters, that ordinary people can hold the powerful accountable. The only question is, will you be one of those people? Smash that like button if your answer is yes. Comment Justice SCRVAD if you believe accountability matters. Subscribe now to join the community fighting for what's right. Your voice matters. Your courage matters. And together, we're building a world where Derek Mitchell's face consequences and Sarah Chen's find the strength to speak up. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the change. I'll see you in the next story. Stay brave.